and I'm just going to introduce Steve Westhead. Steve is a safeguarding advisor, and he's going to give us a bit of an overview of things to do with safeguarding, mainly looking at adult safeguarding and a bit to do with children, but mainly talking about adult safeguarding.
Thanks very much, John. Appreciate the introduction. Just as a way of introduction to myself, I am a safeguarding advisor. I currently work for the British Red Cross, but I am also a qualified social worker, still registered, and I have well over 30 years experience of working in child and adult protection for different local authorities. So I have got quite a solid background in safeguarding. As far as the HDA is concerned, I have been involved with the HDA in different aspects for well over 20 years, attending camps and attending weekends and the AGM and things. So I have got a good sort of background knowledge of HD. What I'm going to do today is just literally go through a few slides talking generally about safeguarding adults and how it impacts a little on safeguarding children as well in the situation that we might find ourselves in. As John said, please put any questions in the chat and I'll see if I can get the answers to you. I mean, in general terms, safeguarding, and we've got to be careful because safeguarding is a massive term. We shouldn't get mixed up between safeguarding and adult and child protection. Adult and child protection is just a small part of safeguarding. Safeguarding is everything. The clue is in the name. You know, when you hold a child's hand to help them cross the road, you are safeguarding them. When you check somebody's battery in their fire alarm, you're safeguarding them. It's a big term, but there's the protection aspect. So safeguarding, in general terms, from a legislative perspective, safeguarding means protecting a citizen's health, well-being, and human rights, enabling them to live free from harm, abuse, and neglect. And it is an integral part of providing a high-quality health and social care. So it's really important, and it's part of everything that's done. So any agencies that you come across or you work for will have safeguarding policies, because it's really important to remember that safeguarding isn't just something that you pick off the shelf when you've got an issue. Safeguarding should be part of everything that you do when you're working with people and with families. It's also a collective responsibility. You know, safeguarding is everybody's responsibility. We've all got that responsibility to report something, to share things when we have concerns. It's just that some people, or some of us, have more responsibility than others in acting about safeguarding things. So the people that we talk about protection when it gets more serious is obviously children and young people, and there is a whole set of legislation to support safeguarding with children and young people. And then adults at risk, so those receiving care, those people with health problems, impairments, learning disabilities. There is quite a broad brush. In terms of adult safeguarding, I just mentioned before that everybody will have policies and procedures. Organisations shouldn't just have policies and procedures, but they should always promote them. and make sure that people know where their safeguarding policies and procedures are, make sure they know how to get hold of people, the right people, when they have concerns that they want to raise. There is no such thing as a quiet life, is there? Everybody has very complex life, and being safe is only one thing. It's only part of that. So it's an important part, but it's part of everybody's general well-being. And different people have different ideas about what being safe means. And it's important that any professionals that work with families know what being safe means to them, so that we're not just talking about legislation and the Care Act. You've got to work with families. Families and professionals should be working together. So, adult safeguarding duties. When we're talking with in terms of adult social services, about who adult social services deal with, this is the list of people, or this is the way that they work out whether someone meets the criteria to get support from them. So the safeguarding duty that the Care Act gives to social services applies to an adult who has need for care and support, and it doesn't matter who's giving that support. It can be the local authority, it could be a charity, it could be anybody, it could be paid for or free, but they are getting additional care and support, and they are experiencing, or they are at risk of, abuse or neglect. And I'll go into the categories, the adult categories of abuse and neglect in a bit more detail later. And as a result of those care and support needs, they can't protect themselves from that risk of abuse or neglect. So what we're actually doing there is just being clear about who qualifies. In terms of HD, someone who has HD would meet the criteria for being a vulnerable adult, or under that definition. When we're talking about adult safeguarding, there are principles, and these are also laid out in the Care Act. So whenever anybody's working with families from any agency, not just social services, there are key principles of safeguarding. Proportionality. So you're only putting support in that's proportional to the needs of the person. A good example of that would be that if you go in and do an somebody comes into a family, does an assessment, and in actual fact, the result of that assessment should be that person would benefit from a support worker coming in for a couple of hours a week just to help them and to give them some direction. You don't decide to put them in a care home, because that's not proportional to what their need is. It's obvious, I suppose, that protection is a principle of safeguarding, because that's one of the major points of what we're doing. We are protecting the adult concerned. And partnership. Partnership is about working together. And while it's obvious, it perhaps needs restating, because partnership is about agencies working together. And quite often in families, you could end up with several different agencies being involved: health, social services, charities, local groups. There's different aspects of what's available in the area could be working. They all need to work together and they all need to work in partnership with the family, which is most important. So what you're trying to do is have a plan where all the different agencies know exactly what's expected of them, but also know what others are doing as well. So nobody's duplicating anything and nobody's missing anything out. Empowerment is about the adult themselves. You know, even if someone is deemed not to have capacity, we still have a duty to do things in a way that they would want, that they would like to have done. And there are certain parts of this that sometimes perhaps causes some issues, because you need the consent. In most cases, you need the consent of the adult for things to happen. And sometimes if they don't want to give consent, you can't force yourself on them. You know, unless they're deemed not to have capacity, an adult has the right to make the wrong decision. And I think sometimes some professionals, extended family, can struggle a little bit with that thing. Accountability is being very clear that your what responsibilities are. You know, the responsibilities of different agencies, the responsibilities of people who are helping, supporting extended family, friends. Everybody has accountability for their actions, particularly the professional agencies that are involved. We need to be sure that if we're not receiving the service that we expect from them, that families can actually take them to task on that and sort of work through any problems. And again, the bottom one is a logical thing, because prevention. So there are times when obviously early intervention works really well, because we want to stop things before they happen. And it's difficult because in some areas, the availability of services can mean that some of the preventative services don't always get in when they, where they should do at the right time. But it is an important aspect of safeguarding that we are working to prevent things happening. When I mentioned before about empowerment, there is a phrase within the Care Act that talks about making safeguarding personal, person-led, outcome-focused. When you're talking about making a plan to work with a family, making safeguarding personal means that it's the person who makes, as well as they can, the decisions. What do they want? What's the outcome they want from this involvement? What do they want the outcome to be, and how do they want people to go about it? And it's coming together to produce a plan that meets everybody's thresholds, everybody's criteria for getting that service in there in a way that is acceptable to the family and the family member in particular. There are some issues when it comes to abuse and neglect, where you can't always just allow someone to continue. If there is Section 43 of the Care Act is the local authority's responsibility to investigate. So if there are concerns about abuse and neglect and severe abuse that make that actually put the person in danger, the local authority must make inquiries or cause others to do so. What that means is that it isn't always a social worker that might do an investigation. It could be somebody from another agency. The local authority has a duty to make sure that that investigation is appropriate and is thorough, but they don't have to do it themselves. A safeguarding adults board is, every local authority has a safeguarding adults board, and really their responsibility is to make sure that all policies and procedures are in place for the local authority and for anybody else who works with vulnerable adults. There is a requirement that they'll also do sort of things like training, and if there are any serious incidents involving any vulnerable adults, they will, the Safeguarding Adults Board will make sure that there is a thorough investigation and results published and learning published about anything that happens. An independent advocate, when sometimes where it's deemed that the person might need some support to represent and themselves to discuss what's going on, when there is a safeguarding inquiry or there's been a safeguarding meeting and there are reviews, where that adult has difficulty in being involved, the local authority has a duty to provide an independent advocate. And the local authority also has a duty to cooperate with the adult and family. Mental capacity. I've talked before a little bit and mentioned about people not having mental capacity. There are a few bits of legislation that apply to adults, in fact, apply to everybody over the age of 16 in England. There are other acts for if anybody's in Scotland and Wales. Every area has its own bit of legislation. There is always, when you're talking about mental capacity, there is always an assumption that adults have mental capacity. Whatever you might think about some of the decisions they're making, there is always an assumption that adults have capacity. And it isn't to them to prove that they have capacity to make their own decisions. It's about other people proving and evidencing that that individual lacks capacity. So it's in a sense down to anybody who decides that there is an issue. It's down to them to sort of arrange for the correct assessments to be done, and to have them completed. It is about that proof that they haven't got capacity. We also need to remember that capacity is something that can change. Capacity can fluctuate and can be affected by conditions and illnesses and temporary things. You know, if I walk out of here and walk across the road, I've got capacity. If I don't get to the other side of the road because I get knocked down, I don't have capacity. And in that situation, other people have to make decisions until I'm back in the land of the living and have capacity again. So it's remembering those things as well. That capacity isn't just a single thing that you have and you lose. It comes in and out. And there are illnesses, I'm sure we know, in terms of sort of, people's memories and things going and coming back. So it is. The Mental Capacity Act has 5 principles to it, and it works in a circular way. I've already mentioned presumed capacity. So we always presume that somebody's got capacity unless the capacity assessment decides that they don't have. We should always be supporting people to make their own decisions where they are able to, even if, as I said before, people have the right to make the wrong decision. if people are lacking capacity, then we're doing things, meetings take place, decisions are made that are in their best interests. And one of the things that we need to remember about that is that when we talk about best interest, it's what's in the person's best interest. If they had capacity and were able to make these decisions, what decision would they make? It's not what the other people in the best interest meeting think is the best for them. You have to ask yourself the question, what would they want to happen if they had capacity? And then when you decide what you're doing, it's the least restrictive intervention. As we said before, you don't go and lock somebody away if they don't need locking away. It's the right sort of support for the situation that they find themselves in. And that just keeps going round and become continually reassessed. If a person lacks capacity to consent for treatment, there is the capacity, the best interest meeting. There has to be a process followed in terms of depriving people of liberty, of forcing them to move into a care home, or anywhere else that they need to be, that's deemed in their interest. So it's not just the doctor or the social worker that makes these decisions. There is a law and a process that has to be followed, and that's underneath the Deprivation of Liberty Safeguarding Standards and the Human Rights Act. So there always has to be an application to the local authority social services department, and the meetings need to take place with the right professionals and the right overview. And in terms of the Human Rights Act, we follow in this country the Human Rights Act 1998. When you look at this, I'm not going to read it all out to you, but when you look at this, you have to remember that, for example, point 1, the European Convention on Human Rights has nothing to do with the EU, or it means we haven't lost anything because of Brexit. It still applies. It's something that we're signed up to do. And it would be the Human Rights Act that would have to be replaced to remove that. It requires in law that everybody that a family might deal with, the courts, police, local authorities, hospitals, schools, anybody carrying out a public function has to respect your human rights. And it spills over into other things. Whenever Parliament sets out any new laws, while Parliament is sovereign and passes laws, and it can pass any laws that it wants, I suppose, in some respects, there will always be somewhere in Parliament, somebody will be looking and making sure that any new laws do not breach the Human Rights Act. So there are those protections in place for people. Now, I mentioned abuse before and the categories of abuse. And when we talk about abuse and we talk about local authorities doing investigations or local authorities taking action, you've got to remember that it's not so much a decision about whether someone is being abused or is at risk of abuse, but it's that level, it's that threshold where some things, while not acceptable, wouldn't get the full force of social services coming down on you. Whereas when you get to the more serious stuff. Now, for adults, there are many types of abuse, and these are all in the Care Act. So physical abuse, domestic violence, which has quite a wide variety of things, not just what we would perhaps normally think of in terms of physical abuse, but financial abuse, emotional abuse, honour-based violence. Sexual abuse is a wide-ranging area. Psychological abuse, emotional threats of harm, bullying, and all these things can be at different levels, but at some point they cross the threshold and they are causing harm to the person. Psychological abuse. Financial abuse or material abuse, this can be theft, fraud, people, persuading people to put them in their will. There's all sorts of things, it can be friends, family, and people that person knows, but it could also be the person who knocks on the door and says, your drive needs doing, or you need new drains, and takes large amounts of money and does very little. So there is that sort of lots of different aspects to financial material abuse. Modern slavery, human trafficking, slavery still exists, and believe you me, I know this working for the Red Cross, that people do bring people up, bring people across to this country and put them in domestic servitude, making them work for nothing or less than nothing. Other examples used are bringing people across to work in nail bars. I'm sure we've all seen things on the news about people being brought across to work in car washes and things like that, or on farms. And there are quite a lot of, there's a lot of information on that available. YouTube and Google are good places to look at that. Discrimination, all forms of discrimination, where, gender, identity, sexual orientation, religion, disability. There are more than several different categories. Organisational abuse, and I suppose for anybody who has any contact with care homes or hospitals, it's not something that happens on a regular basis, but things can, you can never say that abuse can't happen here. It can happen anywhere. And if you have any concerns, as I said before, every organisation has its own processes, its own safeguarding policies and procedures. So if you're in a hospital or a care home, they have procedures, and they will have a procedure for dealing with concerns and complaints. If you can't, if you don't feel you're being listened to, whatever organisation, usually CQC, that oversees inspections of care homes, inspections of hospitals, you can go to the CQC direct to express some concerns and ask for things to be looked at. Neglect, acts of omission, so not just the normal neglect, but ignoring medical care needs, not giving medication, not giving them the right support, or engaging with education. All these things are all neglect. And sometimes neglect is not done on purpose. It can be done because people's needs and health are deteriorating, and self-neglect is one of those things. People's not bothering, neglecting themselves and their surroundings, and some behaviours that are a part of that includes hoarding. When I say hoarding, I don't mean just having like in our house thousands and thousands of pairs of shoes in my wife's wardrobe. I mean you can't move for boxes, for things, you know, people trip over, they become a health hazard, or it becomes a health and safety hazard. So it is quite serious when it gets to that. It has to be quite serious to get to that level. But hoarding is actually one of the things. Now, who abuses? I could, I suppose, I could go through this list and talk about the different things that different people that we've come across. But you'll tell from that the answer to that question basically is anybody. Anybody can abuse and neglect somebody. There is nobody, no area, no organisation that could claim, no, it doesn't happen here and it will never happen here. That's why policies and procedures are so important. It's important for the people who are being given the service that they trust the professionals and the staff that they are dealing with, and that the organisations they're dealing with have really good processes for hiring people and ensuring that safeguarding is taken into account when they're looking to hire somebody, which I'm sure you all know about, things like DBS checks, but agencies should also be doing other things, you know, asking questions about safeguarding in interviews, and in when people are applying for jobs. So the simple answer to that is anybody. Now, I mentioned child protection. Child protection, from our perspective, from today's perspective, there are, as you can see here, there are things that happen in families that will have an impact on children. When a child dies or has an extremely serious injury because of something that's, you know, happened to them from their family, there is what's called a serious case review. People look at what happened and try to learn how to, you know, for the future, how to put things in place to make things better. So just to outline what you know people say here, in terms of children's serious case reviews, over half of the sample of serious case reviews in this particular bit of research found that there were mental health problems. You know, domestic abuse is something that, and different areas have different levels of domestic abuse, but where there is domestic abuse, the parents' relationship can sometimes end up overshadowing the children to the point where the children's well-being and their welfare is being ignored because of the parents' relationship issues. And whilst sometimes you can see the results of that in children, quite often the fact that children have been in these households doesn't actually have an impact on them until they're much older. And again, you know, substance misuse is a similar thing. As it gets worse and worse, and you know, like drug users, the one thing that they're looking for is the next hit. The impact on those around them and their children falls by the wayside. So it's important that you know, that we remember that where we're dealing with, where we're in families or dealing with families where there are children in, that we remember to keep an eye open on that. This is something that you know, if I do child protection for schools or for other professionals, I always put this slide up. You're dealing with a family. So don't just think about the person that you're dealing with. Think about the client, the family, parents, children, extended family, all the things that could that could have an impact on those children, and don't forget to, and the knowledge of what you're doing. I put that on because whereas some people, when we're talking about families, we talk to professionals, and professionals will tell you that they're always told to keep very good records, accurately record everything that happens, visits, plans, everything should be recorded. When you're dealing with agencies as a family, it's a good idea to keep as much information as possible. So that if you are raising something, you can't, you're not just in a situation where you can say, I think somebody said that a few weeks ago or a few months ago or last year. You can actually have minutes of meetings or have emails that show you've got the evidence. It's really important. Record keeping comes into to everybody, to everything. If you have a concern, whether you are a family member, an adult, that's not well, if you're a professional, if you have a concern, you have to pass it on. Even if you think that it's not important, if it's causing you even the smallest bit of concern, then you should pass it on. It's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. You have a piece of information that if you didn't, you passing that on could complete the jigsaw, that other professionals have been looking for information and evidence. Never assume that someone else has done it. I think professionals would rather receive the same information from several sources than not get the information at all, because everybody thought somebody else was going to do it. And not second guessing the outcome is, it doesn't matter how small it is, it's important to pass that information, because it might be the only thing and it might not be important, or it might be the last piece of the jigsaw that means that people can actually do something to protect an adult or protect a child. So it's a bit like a relay race. If you've got a piece of information, don't let go until you're sure and you know that somebody's got that information and is going to make a decision on whether they act on it. That's up to them. They have their professional standards. They'll make that decision. But it's important that that information's passed on, and you know that that information's been passed on before you stop talking about it. So wherever you live, who would you talk to? Who would you contact? If you need to talk to social services, it's important to know the numbers for your local social services. These days, some local authorities don't give out loads of telephone numbers, but might ask you to, on the website, to fill in an online form and somebody will get back to you. Both adult services and children's services will have an out-of-hours service. And again, sometimes that can be an online form that you send through, or they might give numbers to contact the out-of-hours service in an emergency. But it's just important, and perhaps it's worthwhile getting those numbers and having them somewhere handy, rather than if you're dealing with something and have a bit of an emergency, having to start looking on the internet to find out these numbers from the websites. Police, obviously, if you suspect that a criminal act has taken place, you phone 999. If you think that somebody is injured and needs immediate medical treatment, you ring 999 and talk to the ambulance service. If you think that there is a potential adult abuse situation or a potential child abuse situation, then you can you should say so when you're phoning that through, just so that the officers and the ambulance staff, when they turn up, are aware of your concerns and know what to look for. 101 will get you through to the police. Sometimes 101 will get you through to the police after a bit of a wait, but it is important that if it's not a 999 thing, you need to speak to a police officer. You can ring 101, and 101 offers you some choices in terms of where the call goes to. I mentioned the CQC before. If you go on the website for the CQC, what's really handy is at the very top of the website, there's a concern button. So if you have a concern or you want to pass information on about something in a hospital or a care home, you can do that just by pressing the button. A form comes up, you can fill it in. You can fill it in anonymously if you wanted to, but you can also put your contact details if you want to make a complaint or raise an issue that the CQC might want to look at. The other thing with the CQC as well is, in terms of particularly for care homes, you could put the name, there is a search button that you can put the name of a care home in, and you'll get the last inspection report. So if you're looking at care homes or considering care homes or care agencies who come into the home, you can look them up on the CQC website and actually find out what CQC said about them the last time they were inspected, whether they're outstanding or whether they require improvement. That information's there. And I've put the number on this slide as well, if you wanted to contact CQC directly.
Thanks very much, Steve. Could I ask you something? And I think this is something that will happen to quite a lot of the families where there's Huntington's will recognise this situation where they're worried about someone and worried maybe that person's neglecting themselves. And when there's a question about someone's capacity, what happens if that person won't engage with the capacity assessment? What happens then?
Right. I think that first of all, the capacity assessment is what it is. It's a capacity assessment. You don't have specific capacity assessments for different illnesses and different situations. You just have a capacity assessment. The capacity assessment is not just interviews, it's about information sharing as well. So it's really important that if, for example, the person who's doing a capacity assessment on somebody connected with HD is fully aware of HD and its impact on what it does. In terms of there comes a point where there'll be some observation done. It is very, very difficult to do a capacity assessment on someone who won't cooperate. But by the same token, it may be that what the person will then want to do is just do some observational stuff and see whether they can get enough information from observing the person and observing the person interacting with different people to get the conclusions they want. It is a difficult one, and it is something that they're used to overcoming, because it's something that happens quite regularly. So I wouldn't worry in the sense that they're not just going to turn around and say, oh, I'm not doing one off, I know, I'm buggering off. They will make every effort to try and complete their assessment by doing what they need. But it is really important that they have as much information as possible, practical information about the person they are assessing.
Great. Thank you very much, Steve. So just to say thank you to everyone who's attended as well, and thanks once again to Steve. That's great.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for listening patiently.
Thank you.